Well, hello there. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of Telile 24/7. I'm your host, Adam Cook, and we have a busy show for you this week. Later on in the program, we'll begin a two-part series on the Richmond County Literacy Network, and I'll visit the network's St. Peter's Learning Centre and speak to its new executive director, Lisa Berthier. You're also going to find out what led to a decision by the provincial government last week to introduce legislation giving municipalities the power to increase a marketing levy that's charged to people who rent hotel rooms and other accommodations across Cape Breton Island. We also have a peek at the latest activities of the Cape Breton South Recruiting for Health Committee as the organization continues to seek out new doctors, nurses, and other healthcare professionals for our region. But we begin with our continuing coverage of the aftermath of Hurricane Fiona, and specifically the perspective of Richmond County's new Emergency Services Coordinator. Stephen Marcellus had barely been on the job for a few weeks before Hurricane Fiona blew through the Strait area and across Cape Breton Island. How did he work with existing Richmond County infrastructure and emergency responders and municipal officials across the county to be able to help people through the storm and to deal with the aftermath of the storm? For the answers, I did a Zoom meeting with Stephen Marcellus at his office at the Richmond Municipal building in Arishat. Here's that conversation right now. And now joining us from his office in Arishat, we're pleased to welcome Richmond County's new Emergency Services Coordinator. He is Stephen Marcellus. Stephen, thank you for joining me today on Telile 24/7.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. You, of course, have been busy, as has your office been over the past couple of weeks with what's been going on in terms of Hurricane Fiona. But I want to go back before that. You applied for this position and started in early September. So I just want to get a sense, both for myself and for our viewers. Did you have any kind of background in emergency management? What made you decide to apply for this particular job?
I have 23 years with Municipal Fire Service in Ontario. I've done volunteer with Coast Guard, ran not large scale, but medium-sized scale searches out on the water. The posting came up. I put in for it, and here I am.
What appealed to you about Richmond County in terms of its own emergency management setup and just the relationship that the office had with the municipal council?
Richmond County, the people, the place, the area outside of Arishat, even though this is kind of the hub, but getting up to Foreshue and Framboise, I'm probably pronouncing those wrong. I haven't got my island lingo down yet.
Still time to learn, yeah.
The place it is just fantastic. It's a sense of community when you go to all the little different pockets. Everybody pitches in and just makes you feel like it's home.
Did you like what you found when you got here? Because this was a department that had been run on an interim basis by a longtime EMO coordinator here, Cecil Frost. He wrapped up, you came in. What did you think of the state of emergency management in Richmond County, the various emergency responders and everything else connected to it when you first arrived in September?
So far, I'm still in the learning process. Cecil kept it up and running, and the folks before him. I'm still getting my feet wet, so I'm still learning the system, still learning all the different players. The volunteers have been welcome and fantastic. Me being the new guy, so yeah, it's just a challenge trying to get my feet under me and not fully change what's going on, but kind of move things along without there being any interruption.
What's your relationship been like so far with the municipal government, with Warden Amanda Mumberket and the councillors? What's that been like?
So far, I've had minimal interaction. I've had one council meeting and then just kind of passing in the hallway. So I look forward to sitting down and meeting all five of them and getting more of a sense on kind of the expectations on both sides.
Now, some might call this great timing, or some might call it terrible timing that an emergency services coordinator takes this position just before a hurricane blows through. That being said, this was your chance to really work with the various parts of EMO across Richmond County. Can you describe what that weekend was like? I understand that you were manning a control center with the CAO of the county, Troy McCulloch, who himself is new to the position. So what was that atmosphere like for you?
There's nothing like getting your feet wet the first month.
Literally and figuratively, yes.
Yep. not to sound, that relieved, but, Richmond County, we fared not too bad when you look at all the devastation across the province and Cape Breton. The North Shore devastated, up in CBRM, same thing. We were very fortunate that it was very minimal. Power outages were probably our major concern. We did have a mobile home in town that unfortunately did lose its roof. So, we're working with residents on how we can assist them. The province, they more or less ran the show up in the CBRM. So, there was 3 meetings a day. Anything that came in to my office went up to them, and hopefully they were able to enact on it fairly quickly. There wasn't a lot in return coming back for follow-up. So I have to assume that everything went swimmingly. The power outages were, I think, somewhere around in between. I think it was Grand River and Lordwise. I think up in that area was sort of our big pocket. Every other area kind of just had, up to 5 to 20 kind of outages, at least going by the power map.
Now, is your office still working with anybody impacted by the storm, either directly or indirectly? You mentioned power outages. We're pretty much clear of that particular hurdle right now. Most residents that did have downed trees have been able to get those cleaned up. You spoke about the mobile home in Arichat. I know fundraising is going on for Janasta and Vincent Chesson at this point. Is your office active in working with any people at this point across the county in terms of general cleanup and assessing damage?
No, right now it's just on a case-by-case basis. Somebody reaches out where they need some assistance with the forms for the financial assistance. We have them here in the office. They're online, both on novascotia.ca as well as Richmond County. So everything is, as much as we can, we've made things available. And then if anybody has any questions, they can reach out to me.
So what did that whole experience teach you about the setup of emergency management here in Richmond County? Because, as I say, you were just a few weeks on the job. What do you take away from all of that?
When you think you're prepared, there's always something that comes up that kind of catches you off. So we were very good here where I had us prepared as best as I could. We didn't enact any comfort centers on a full-time basis. They're really just after the storm anyways. So yeah, it's just, kind of prepare for the worst, hope for the best, and, hopefully all your planning goes, and, if something comes up, just deal with it in real time and to the best of your abilities.
Now, I understand there were 22 different comfort centers set up. Did it surprise you that there was this much commitment to helping people through the storm through Richmond County, that there were as many as 22 different centers across a rural municipality?
With the community that I've interacted with, no surprise at all. The residents here are fantastic. The first responders that I've met, unfortunately, I haven't met them all, but the ones I have been fantastic. They've all been welcoming. The sense of community here is second to none. Everybody pitches in. There's a lot of stuff that I noticed driving around where, the residents just pitched in for one another. And there's a lot of stuff that I'm probably still not aware of.
So what happens now that we've cleared through Fiona? There's still some cleanup happening and some fundraising going on for the Chessons, as I mentioned. But now that we're through there, what are your priorities in terms of emergency management in the short term and the long term for Richmond County? What are some of the things you're hoping to do and hoping that you'll be able to see accomplished during your time here?
Well, because I was new, the communication between the departments and the key players up with the province, got to work through that on the best communication methods for those folks and everybody involved. It wasn't terrible. Email, I find, isn't always the best because there's that lag time when you want to have an answer, especially for people in need. So it's just making sure that all the contact lists are up to date, and the key players are actually still in the roles that my sheets actually have them down as. Following up with any financial assistance if people need it, again, reach out to me, and then I'll get you sort of pointed in the right direction.
Is there anything you think the public might not understand about emergency management? And I mean, you mentioned you've had all your years working with different departments in Ontario. Is there a misconception about what emergency management does that you hope you'll be able to shine some light on, or even just something that in general people may not know about?
We don't have all the answers.
Yep.
I'd say that's probably the biggest misconception. Depending on the emergency, it's very, very dynamic and fluid on, who's doing what, who's looking after what, and the resources that are coming. When you look at power, a lot of residents were reaching out in the first couple of days that, Nova Scotia Power chopped trees down, but then, they didn't affect anything over here, or they didn't chop down the whole tree. They have their plan. Be patient, and people will get to you. And when there's an emergency where you're calling 911 for whatever the issue is, just be patient with the responders that are coming. That's really my big takeaway from what went on with Fiona is the patient aspect. Just be patient. People are coming. People are working as hard as they can to do what they need to.
We've covered a lot of ground in a short time, Stephen, and I
Yes,
thought we might. Do you have anything else you'd like to add about all this just before we wrap up?
Just thanking the residents of Richmond County for making me feel welcome and that I've been here for years.
All right. Well, we're glad you've got that welcome, and we appreciate you taking some time out of a busy day to speak to us here. Stephen Marcellus, thank you for joining us on Telile 24/7 this afternoon.
Thank you very much, sir.
All right. Stephen Marcellus is Richmond County's new Emergency Services Coordinator. We've been speaking to him from his office in Arishad. Stay tuned for more of Telile 24/7 in just a moment. It's been a busy period for the Cape Breton South Recruiting for Health Committee, the organization that was established nearly 3 years ago to bring new doctors, nurses, and other healthcare professionals to our region, has recently had a new wrinkle to its operations by partnering with the Provincial Department of Health and Wellness to help accelerate the arrival of Ukrainian healthcare professionals in our region. So how is all this working out in terms of the healthcare scenario here in Richmond County and around the Strait area? For the answers, here's an update from Richmond County Warden Amanda Mumbercat, which was delivered at last week's Committee of the Whole meeting at the Richmond Municipal building in Arishad.
So the team has continued to be busy. I did want to just update on a couple of things. With leadership from our program director, Gina McDonald, we warmly welcomed a new physician to the Arishad Clinic in September. So that's pretty exciting news. So welcome Dr. Boudreau to the Arishad Clinic. I hope we get to meet you in person soon. The organization also recently published an annual newsletter highlighting activities that included secured funding for a new welcome guide, and they are working with the Cape Breton Local Immigration Partnership on that guide as well. There were Doctors' Day celebrations held in Arishad, Lordways, Port Hawkesbury, Strait Richmond Hospital. There have been appreciation activities for healthcare workers across the region. I know recently Gina participated in a family medicine conference, so we are at important recruitment events very consistently. There has been an additional physician being identified as being recruited to Port Hawkesbury as well. That announcement is to be determined yet, but we do understand that an additional person has been identified. And of course, we had the Community of Care Awards, which everyone was familiar with. I did want to put a special plug in for the work that Gina is doing on the Business of Medicine course that's coming up for a group of, I think it might be 8 young physician residents. It's going to be held at the Boudreau Lakes Inn at the end of October, and they are working with Nova Scotia Health on regional planning activities to advocate for more resources in the region as well. And it's really interesting. That Business of Medicine course in particular is going to be an opportunity. There's a learning piece that has to happen there, and of course that's the centerpiece, but there are some community activities that we can connect those folks to as well to really showcase our region. So that's really exciting. I did put a note in my update, I think, to council that the regional approach to healthcare recruitment seems to be really working. It's been lots of steep learning curves, but we're starting to see more professionals locating here. and that the professionals who are working here now are getting the message that their efforts are truly appreciated. So we are working now on our terms of reference, because as a growing organization, evolving organization, there needs to be some work done there. But overall, I have to say the work of the group's been pretty stellar. So I just wanted to open it up for questions, use the committee of the whole as an opportunity to update the public on the work of that group, but also for councillors, of course, to ask any questions about it if you've not been able to attend the meetings. So any questions on that? Okay. So I will just end by saying I'd encourage everyone to follow on Facebook. If you're on Facebook, you can follow Cape Breton South Recruiting for Health, or it's at CB South #4 Health. And that's how you find us on Facebook. And there's all kinds of updates going on there on the daily.
The Nova Scotia government introduced legislation just a few days ago that could have a big impact on the Cape Breton Island tourism industry. If it's approved, the legislation would give municipalities the opportunity to set individual marketing levies that would be applied to the room rates charged to people who come to Cape Breton to rent hotel rooms or other accommodations. Now, how would this rate be a big boon to the tourism industry here in Cape Breton? For the answers, we're going to give you 3 different bits of information. First of all, here's a presentation made by the CEO of the Destination Cape Breton Association, Terry Smith, to this month's regular monthly meeting of Port Hawkesbury Town Council. Smith gives a bit of the history of the Cape Breton Marketing Levy, which got underway in 2005, but he also gives some figures from the most recent tourism seasons for Cape Breton, and also breaks down how marketing levies are applied in different parts of the Maritimes. Here's Terry Smith with his history lesson on the Cape Breton Island Marketing Levy.
Right now, it's a 2% fee that's charged on fixed roof accommodation stays, properties with 10 or more rooms. Longer term stays, students in dorms, medical stays, they are all exempt from the levy. The Act says that the funds must be used to promote the island as a tourism destination. And at the time the legislation was passed, there was a memorandum of understanding with all 5 municipalities that designated Destination Cape Breton as the official agency to promote the island. And so basically since that time, operators have been charging the levy to the visitors. Then they remit the levy funds to each of the municipalities, and the municipalities in turn provide those funds to us, and we use it to promote the island. The vast majority of the marketing that we do these days is all digital, and so we're trying to drive traffic to the website where people can find out everything there is to do about the island, help them make their plans, and hopefully stay a little bit longer. So that just shows you there's been a really steady growth in terms of sessions to the website since the levy was implemented. The growth in website traffic has actually continued, and we hit a record level last year, and we've already far surpassed last year's numbers this year. So it's continuing that upward trajectory. Shared economy or Airbnb, for the most part, they were getting a bigger share of the accommodation pie. So if you actually combine the two, the Airbnb with the other room nights sold, we would still be on that increasing trend. So it had been going on an increase for that basically almost a decade. Compared to the provincial average over that time period, if we look at our incremental room nights sold, our growth relative to the rest of the province was more than double. So a pretty strong statement that the levy was having an impact. We've done a rough calculation of this, but basically the return on investment we're estimating is $27 in visitor spending for every dollar collected. However, our current situation, so we had been receiving funding when the levy was established. It started with Enterprise Cape Breton Corporation, or ECBC. They had struck a deal with Destination Cape Breton at the time where they would match the levy funds. They then decided, well, okay, the levy funds keep going up and we've got to cap them, so they capped them at $640,000 a year. But then ECBC was basically eliminated by the federal government, and COA took over the role. COA honored the agreement for a couple of years, but in 2019 they signaled to us that this is an agreement, because it had been made with ECBC, that they don't offer to any other destination in Atlantic Canada. So they said, we've got to reduce your funding. So they've been reducing it by $100,000 a year, which is a pretty significant annual decrease. So this year it's $440,000. Next year it's going to be $340,000, and then they said that it will level off at about $300,000 a year. So basically a cut of $340,000 from where we were a few years ago. At the same time, Airbnb, mainly Airbnb, a little bit of Vrbo rentals, they grew from 7% of registered room nights sold to last year it was 30%. So they are getting an increasingly larger share of the pie. Right now, because our levy only applies to accommodations with 10 or more rooms, Airbnbs are exempt for the most part. There's very few that would have more than that. So that is taking away from what we might be able to collect in terms of the levy. So those factors, and then of course the last 2 years we had the pandemic, so the levy revenues have been significantly impacted by that. ACOA told us in 2019 they were going to cut our funding, so we started looking at what we could do. We moved our office into the former Visitor Information Center building in Sydney River to cut costs. We reduced our staff. We had 11 full-time people in 2019. We have 9 currently, and actually have 2 that are on parental leave and haven't been directly replaced, so that has helped this year. We took other steps to achieve organizational efficiencies, trying to work smarter with technology and things like that. And we've honed our marketing program. As I mentioned, our website traffic is at a record level this year. So despite a shrinking budget, we've really focused in on being efficient with what we do marketing-wise. However, as I showed you, we had that decade of growth, really. It helped us as a destination climb to new heights, but if we don't do something about it, we're heading for a cliff, because we've cut everywhere we can cut, and the next place we would have to cut would be the marketing budget, and that could impact the growth of the industry on the island. So we hired a consultant in 2021 to look at our revenue streams, and Floor 13 is an agency that works with organizations like ours across the country, and they basically took a look at what our revenue streams are, compared it to other organizations like ours, and basically came back. The number one recommendation was to increase the marketing levy rate. And I'll just read what it says there from a little snippet from the recommendation. Even without the current income stream challenge faced by Destination Cape Breton, there's a multitude of benchmark evidence to suggest that the current 2% levy places the region at a competitive disadvantage to many of its competitor destinations. So for us, we're at 2%. Halifax is currently at 2%. In Prince Edward Island, Charlottetown and Summerside are 3%. In New Brunswick, Moncton, St. John, and Fredericton, 3.5%. In Gros Morne, Newfoundland, there's a small one there that's 3%. And then the highest rate in the region is St. John's, Newfoundland, at 4%. So the average levy rate in Canada, and this is as of 2019, was 3.43%. So we are the lowest in the region, and far below the national average as well. So we started taking a look at this, and this spring, in May and June, I went out and talked to accommodation operators around the island. Had about a dozen in-person sessions and then Zoom as well. And we presented 3 options to them to get their feedback. The first one was to increase the levy rate to 3%. Halifax has already taken steps to move to a 3% rate as well. The estimate would be that this would add roughly $450,000 to our budget, so replacing what we had lost with ACOA, but it doesn't address the Airbnb and Verbo growth and them getting an increasingly larger share of the pie. The next option was to apply the levy to all fixed roof operators. So there's a question of fairness. For example, Port Hood, just up the road, in Port Hood there's an accommodation called Hillcrest Hall. They've got 11 rooms. They charge the levy. Right down the street there's House Troyberg with 7 units. They don't charge the levy. So they are competitors within their community, so there's a question of fairness as to, the smaller operators are benefiting from the destination marketing that's done as well. So anyway, the estimate from this, just because we don't have great information on Airbnbs in terms of the average rate and things like this, but we estimate this would add about $250,000 to $350,000 to our budget, so it might replace what we're losing from ACOA. But as I showed in the map chart, you could say that we're leaving money on the table because visitors are clearly paying 3% or higher in other regions of Atlantic Canada. And then the third option was the combination of 1 and 2. So the feedback from operators, and this was the vast majority, they supported going to 3% as long as all fixed roof accommodations collect, including Airbnb and Verbo. Some operators stated, we've already quoted rates to groups and things like that are coming for 2023, so best to give us a little bit of notice and have January 1st, 2024 as a start date for the amendment. Some operators, because of things like, of course, the workforce shortage that we have now, have suggested that rather than just being able to spend the money on marketing, if you could look at things like things that could address the workforce shortage, that would be helpful as well. And it was also mentioned that by numerous operators, it's kind of it's a related but separate issue, but they felt that Airbnb and Verbo must be more regulated to ensure a more level playing field. So that's something that could be looked at as well. So the province, prior to the pandemic, had been having initial discussions about doing consistent legislation for levies across the province. So right now, Halifax has a levy act. We have one. Yarmouth has one, and just recently Digby put one in place. But the province is getting approached by other jurisdictions who are saying, we'd like to have levies as well. So they said, well, why do we have this patchwork of legislation across the province? Why don't we make it consistent across the board? So they are now coming forward and stating that they will like to move forward with legislation to it would basically replace what we have currently in Cape Breton. But the good news is that what they're proposing is almost exactly what we were hearing from operators and what we were proposing to amend in ours.
And now we have some municipal reaction to the concept of municipalities getting the power to increase the Cape Breton Island marketing levy. You're going to hear from Port Hawkesbury Mayor Brenda Chisholm-Beaton in just a couple of minutes. But first, let's take you to last week's Committee of the Whole meeting for Richmond Municipal Council. Not only were councillors eager to discuss the idea of having the power to increase the marketing levy on their own, but some of them had some discussions about the impact of Airbnbs and similar operations on the Cape Breton Island tourism industry. Let's begin with some thoughts from Richmond Warden Amanda Mumbercat.
Today we had consultations with the Department of Municipal Affairs and Housing. Both Troy and I participated in 2 separate consultations today. It was regarding the proposed amendments to the Cape Breton Island Marketing Levy Act. Destination Cape Breton has offered 3 suggested changes or comments. Number one, they are suggesting that the new legislation state that the levy will apply to all fixed roof accommodations as defined in the Tourism Accommodation Registry Act, which includes Airbnb and VRBO, regardless of the number of rooms. Our current bylaw indicates that if you have 10 rooms or more, then the levy would apply to you. The proposed legislation right now states that you would have to have at least one room in order for this legislation, the marketing levy, to apply to you, which very squarely leaves it back at the municipal level to have a bylaw in place. Instead of saying in the legislation, it's this many rooms or it's one room or more, they said at least. So they're giving themselves flexibility, and I think in turn giving us flexibility. But at the end of the day, I guess the suggestion from DCBA is that we be consistent with this across all of the acts, so that you don't have one part of the province saying this many rooms and another part saying that many rooms. So I think that's kind of the aim there.
Yeah.
The second recommendation was that the language for use of the funds be changed to funds collected will be used exclusively on activities and programs that directly support the development of the tourism industry and the marketing of destinations from which they were generated. And the reason that's important is that if it's limited to marketing only, it's not going to allow Destination Cape Breton and other marketing organizations to work on things like the workforce shortage, customer service training, all of the things that are critically important to the sustainability and the ongoing success of our tourism industry and have a direct impact on our ability to promote it. So they're looking for some flexibility there. And the third was that there is a seamless process to replace the current Cape Breton Island Marketing Levy Act with the new legislation, so there's no impact on planning or budgeting for Destination Cape Breton. And from what I saw today, it looks like we've got a good overlap in the legislation, that basically our bylaw will stay until such time as, it's something like a year or something to that effect. So I think we're in good shape there, but just to protect our destination marketing organization, I think it would be smart for us to state that we'd be in favor of that. So they're requesting council proceed with a motion of support for the proposed amendments.
So when Terry was here last time, we decided to defer our decision in terms of support until we would see, because we were the first visit I think he had.
Yes.
So do we have any kind of indication? I was hoping to see that in his email, but do we have any indication from him about the stance of other municipalities?
So all I can tell you is from the discussions that I heard in the consultation today is that people are generally in favor of this. On the number of rooms, there's a little bit more hesitancy, but I think it's certainly the more of a housing crisis that a municipality has, the more inclined they are to be in favor of a level playing field for everyone. And that's the terminology that I've heard used by all of the municipal representatives so far. Level playing field. It's not fair to have some being treated one way and others another way. So. But that's not necessarily official council support of that direction. It was just the representatives, right?
From different municipal units that were in attendance.
Exactly.
Who could be staff or council or
yeah.
I know when it comes to taxation-wise, a motel, hotel,
You talking commercial tax, Councillor Digg?
I'm talking, no,
Property tax?
property tax.
Okay, so that's separate,
It is,
totally separate from this.
kind of.
So the marketing levy is charged to visitors, right? The accommodations, the fixed roof accommodations provider would
Yep.
have to collect the levy from the visitor. It's, I think, 2% now.
Yeah, it's just a surcharge goes on your bill.
It's a
and you go to the
surcharge,
hotel
yeah,
and-
exactly. It has no impact on, and then basically the hotel or whatever, the fixed roof accommodation would submit that to essentially it lends
To
up
the
destination.
organization that
To
they've
us
been
and then
Yeah.
on to them.
Right,
Exactly.
100%. But, and I guess my only little kickback is that I understand where they would like, so the larger industries or motels or 10 rooms or more would like to see this as a fair playing field to everybody. In this, on the opposite hand, the person with only one room or a bed and breakfast is paying full taxes on their investment or on their full tax on their
Property
home or
tax.
property, whereas your 10 rooms or more is not.
They pay property tax.
They do, but they're given a,
There's some accommodations, I think, depending on their situation, that are Are they charged at a different rate, like a 6-month rate or something?
They're only charged, correct. They're not charged like a full year.
I'm
So,
not sure who is and who isn't.
so a $500,000
For some seasonal.
building isn't
I
charged
actually didn't know that was a
$500,000.
thing.
Yeah.
Regardless, I would suggest that those larger accommodations are paying a lot more property tax
Yeah.
than.
Actually, they're not, and that's why I say.
So you're
Before
telling
I
me
would-
someone with a single Airbnb is going to pay more property tax than, say, the
I am.
first home?
Yeah, I am.
I think we should look into that then.
I know it's still coming from the, I guess, the person going in or the
Visitor.
visitor.
Yeah.
However, it's still a cost that has to be given out from the owner.
It's an in and an out for the owner though, right? It's not,
The owner's not paying.
the owner
No,
doesn't
I
pay.
I understand,
Right.
but the owner's saving
Yeah.
on the left hand.
The owner's not saving anything, like I say, it's an in and out, although I understand it could be viewed as slightly discouraging in the sense that it's another surcharge for the customer.
Yeah.
It's an increased cost to the customer at the end of the day. It's probably a little bit of extra work for the owners as well, because they have to deal with this, collecting this and remitting it. However, I think, based on the numbers he showed us, we can see right in front of us where they're seeing the benefit from it.
Yeah.
There's a good return on investment here.
Certainly, we can look into that matter that you've brought up, Councillor Digdon, because it's kind of news to me. So I think maybe our best bet here would be this
But I mean, our commercial rate is
It's-
more than double our residential
I know,
rate,
I'm
even if
trying
they
to
were only
figure
paying
it
for
out.
6 months.
Yeah.
How could it possibly be less? And I've never heard about this 6 months, so I'm not saying,
Yeah, I don't
I just don't know anything about that, so I
Yeah.
don't know.
So we can do some work finding that out, I guess is what I'm saying. But nothing that we decide here, this is just committee of the whole, so we could, we
Yeah,
could
well,
make
and it
this
was just for
decision at
discussion, it's
regular
just-
council, you
Right.
know what I
There is
mean?
something for
To me, when I read those three and when I think about them, like, I would support, supporting them. I would supporting Destination Cape Breton and requesting those amendments. But I'm still a little I'm still looking to see what the rest of
Yes.
the municipalities, and I know that somebody has to go first, I
Yeah.
get it, but,
Yeah. But I think it's fair enough, because that was what we talked about last
Yeah.
time. So why don't we leave it at, we're gonna bring this back to it will come back anyway to our regular council
Yeah.
meeting. And our decision for this evening could be to do a little bit of homework on that 6-month or seasonal taxation piece, and to check back in with Destination Cape Breton and
Right.
see if they've made any headway
Yeah.
on the other pieces.
that,
Would
that,
be-
that I would love, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay,
Thank you.
great. Okay, I can certainly do that.
And now, as promised, here is some reaction from Port Hawkesbury Mayor Brenda Chisholm-Beaton following Terry Smith's presentation at the Town Council meeting held earlier this month.
Well, I do think that it's kind of a no-brainer, particularly so because in comparison to other regions across Atlantic Canada, we're relatively on the lower end of the spectrum in terms of a levy. And we do understand through the presentation that Terry Smith gave that Halifax is also considering a 3% levy, so a 1% increase on their current 2% levy. So it makes sense to kind of create that level playing field in terms of, what competition across Atlantic Canada is charging as a levy. And at the end of the day, if we aren't creating that kind of level playing field, then that is like lost revenue that we can use here on the island of Cape Breton and Unama'ki to be able to market our island to continue to grow. So according to the presentation, Cape Breton tourism is growing at double the rate of Nova Scotia tourism. So it only makes good sense to create that level playing field, increase the levy, and also look at a much more equitable levy system so that we make sure that all of the accommodation providers across the island are able to contribute to that levy. I really like that the province is considering having something that will really cover off all of the province, because what I think is going to be important for tourism across the board for Nova Scotia and for Cape Breton is to have that predictability for the visitors, so that they know if they're coming to Cape Breton, if they're going to Yarmouth, if they're visiting HRM, that they're going to be paying the same levy. So I think it's a pretty smart move on the part of the province.
And considering the positive tourism numbers for Cape Breton Island both this summer and in the past few years, Even as the province struggled with the COVID-19 pandemic, Mayor Chisholm-Beaton feels it's time to strike while the iron's hot in terms of working out the marketing levy situation.
We're hot on the Richter scale of tourism, that's for sure. So let's make sure that we are making sure that we have a levy that is going to invest in destination Cape Breton. There's nowhere to go but up in terms of our numbers.
Some of our viewers may not know that it's the mandate of Telile 24/7 to explain how the actions of the municipal, provincial, and federal governments affect you and affect organizations in your community. Well, this week we're going to begin a two-part series on the Richmond County Literacy Network, and we're going to hear from Lisa Berthier, the network's new executive director, about the impact of the three levels of government on the programs that the Literacy Network delivers. I had the chance to visit Lisa Berthier at the St. Peter's Learning Center for the Richmond County Literacy Network. Here's our conversation right now. We're here at the St. Peter's Learning Center for the Richmond County Literacy Network with the organization's new executive director, Lisa Berthier. Lisa, thank you for joining me on Telile 24/7 today.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
My first question is about why you personally chose to apply for the vacant position of executive director for the Richmond County Literacy Network. What attracted you to the position and to the organization?
Wow, well, I've been in the job for almost 6 months now. And what appealed to me was the literacy part. So at the Richmond County Literacy Network, obviously literacy is our main focus, but it's literacy with an emphasis on employability. So two things that go very well together, and that I've been fortunate enough to work in the past on a number of literacy initiatives in the French community, provincially, and to have that opportunity to be the executive director at home was an opportunity I couldn't pass up. So I was very happy that the job became available when it was. I follow in the footsteps of somebody who was in the position for 23 years. The Literacy Network started in 1998 with Millie Hatt as the network coordinator and Shirley McNamara as the president. And 24 years later, Millie just retired, and Shirley Mack is still the president. So Shirley, I call her Shirley Mack, but Shirley McNamara, who everybody I'm sure in Richmond County has heard of from a literacy perspective, but also as a tool, I think, to bring people the skills that maybe they were lacking, to bring people together and to help fill the gaps where they were. So for 23 years in, I think the literacy community looks different, or the needs of that community are different. Back in 1998, we had the downturn in the fishing industry. We had a number of economic issues. And, when we look at what the needs are today, they're certainly different. They may not be where we were 23 years ago, but they still exist. Unfortunately, there are a number of issues that are chronic to small rural communities, and we hope to make changes where changes are needed.
You mentioned your predecessor, Millie Hatt, and of course, Shirley McNamara is still the president of the Richmond County Literacy Network. Did these people have any kind of advice for you as you were settling into your new position as executive director just 6 months ago?
Oh, there was lots of advice, and I think when you've been there for that long, there's this wealth of information that unfortunately probably didn't get transmitted in the 2 weeks that Millie and I had to do a transition. I'm very happy to be working with a board who has some long-term members, but also some new members, and who are cognizant of the fact that the literacy landscape has changed, that 25 years ago, nobody ever expected that we'd be in a classroom and we'd be learning virtually, or that we'd have a pandemic and we'd have to pivot. And we were able to do that because of the digital literacy that we've done in Richmond County over the years, where people were comfortable working on their computer at home. And I think that the advice that I have taken is to learn from the past and make it my own.
It seems like there was a strong foundation here at the Richmond County Literacy Network by the time you got here. You mentioned the acceleration of digital literacy programs. Basically, what was waiting for you when you arrived in your position 6 months ago?
There were a number of programs going on. So I started on March 21st. So we're at almost the tail end of the winter semester, and then there was the beginning of a new project. So it was a very busy time to be starting. I'm happy that I started at the end of somebody's project and not, in July, for example, when there was nothing going on. But so it allowed me to see some of the things that were happening. I work out of Arishat, where the main office is, and our classroom is here in St. Peter's, where we're at today. So not that far away, but we don't get to come to each other's offices that much, and we're going to change that. So we have a big screen here that you don't see right now, but we'll show you around in a little while. And we should be more connected, and that's something that we're working on. And if you look over here and see our owl, we've invested in infrastructure and technical things to allow us to be more connected to each other as an entity, and it allows our board to get together and have meetings virtually. They are now hybrid meetings, but during the pandemic, we saw that people can work or meet from wherever they're at if they have connectivity. So that's another challenge that we have, I guess, is how do we connect all parts of Richmond County to each other and to the world. This is our owl. This is a camera and a recording device. So it's a microphone. It works in video conferencing mode. So you attach this to your computer when you're doing a Zoom call or any kind of virtual presentation you might be doing. You can use it in a classroom setting. It will capture up to 18 feet. So if you put it in the middle of your room, it'll capture an 18-foot radius. And like any owl, I don't know, all owls, it has two eyes here, but like any good teacher, it has eyes in the back of its head. So it will pick up images from wherever. So if you've been on a Zoom call, you know how difficult it is to figure out who's talking because you can only see a static position. This allows the camera to, this lens, this fisheye lens, will pop up and will move around and capture who's speaking as early as they hear their voice. So it takes a matter of seconds for them to readjust, or for this to readjust the who's speaking on the screen, and it'll give you the three last speakers who have spoken up on your screen. So it's a little toy, a little device, a learning opportunity for us to be able to say, here's our gift. If you're coming to our meeting space, you can use our owl. And for our students, it will bring a better experience, I think. There are challenges to learning virtually, and anything we can do to make it feel like they're in the room or to hear better or see better, we're going to do that.
Lisa, you'd spoken to me earlier about connectivity and the importance of not only connecting the offices in St. Peter's and Arishat, but also reaching out to communities all across Richmond County. How does the owl, from both a technological and a symbolic standpoint, represent the connectivity that you and the Literacy Network want to have all over the county?
Well, I think it's an excellent symbol of connectivity, and it will allow us to have, whether we're meeting as a network, as a board, as learners who may have a teacher in Arishat, but they're situated here in St. Peter's, or vice versa, or to have a trainer stay in Sydney and teach us remotely and save money, save some travel time. We learned during the pandemic how to work remotely, how to learn from home, but sometimes there's a storm coming. Instead of canceling a class, so this tool will, it's not the panacea. It doesn't teach the class on its own, but it allows a facilitator to bring together the students a bit more effectively. So in a larger learning environment, you can have two of these. You can connect this to a whiteboard where the person is writing on the board, and it brings it to life. So we're very happy to have been able to acquire this.
This isn't the only owl in the Richmond County Literacy Network's arsenal. When you come to the door of the St. Peter's Learning Centre, you'll be greeted by this little fellow. But as Lisa Berthier's already started to tell you, it's about much more than pictures and images of birds. As a matter of fact, the Richmond County Literacy Network is an organization that works with 3 different levels of government to be able to get its programs out. Here's Lisa to explain how it all works.
The Richmond County Literacy Network is a not-for-profit, which is separate from Richmond County. It may have been a misnomer. It may have had a different structure in the past. However, we are not a part of Richmond County Council, for example, that whole body. We are separate. We're a standalone community learning organization, a not-for-profit. We are funded, I'm going to say 95% from the provincial government through adult education. And we sometimes have different partners at the provincial level that will fund us. For example, we've done projects with community services in the past. And we also, I guess, are connected to the federal government because the money for literacy comes from the federal government to each province. So there are a number of programs at the federal level that are similar in each province, yet sometimes different depending on the needs or how each province has adapted to literacy and what kind of emphasis they've put on literacy. Throughout the years, I would say that the relationship with the different levels of government may have been different. We fall under the Nova Scotia School of Adult Learning. That's the program that's financed by adult education and immigration. And it used to fall under the Department of Employment and Economics and getting people back to work, and now it's literacy attached to immigration. So it's always seen as an obstacle, and I don't want people to think that we at the Literacy Network are only for people who are illiterate. We're more of a learning center, and in fact, under NASAL, we're recognized as a community learning organization, and therefore we should be offering learning opportunities to people, whether that's in mathematics or computers or English, reading and writing, that kind of thing, to prepare you for something else that you want to do. Some people are employed and they want something better. Some people are not employed. That segment of the population that is retired isn't our bread and butter. We don't get finance to do programs that, like the health literacy piece that I'd like to do. So then we have to go partner with other people in the community and say, what do you need and what role can we play? Can we bring computers to it? Can we bring an owl? Can we bring a meeting location for you? Once we get experts in certain fields, we gladly train people, but right now we pay facilitators and moderators to come do our thing. So does the community need us to be an expert at something? And if so, what is that? Well, what do people in Richmond County want from us? And then, I'd love to be able to offer everything, but knowing that we have specific mandates from the government. So how is what we do as a recognized charity different than what we do as a community learning organization? And we have the opportunity to do both. And I think it's just by dialoguing with people and figuring out what the needs are and how we can satisfy a need versus somebody else. We are co-chairing the Richmond County Collaborative Network with the county, and that hadn't been done in a really long time, so I'm very proud of that collaboration. And I think that we all need to work together, but there is no need for me to go to the federal level. There's no, I'm not bringing anything to them. In fact, I'm just saying thanks for sending money to the province at the moment. It doesn't mean that we won't work with our MP, Mike Calloway. We'd be happy to see any projects, that might benefit them, that could benefit us. But our everyday relationships are with the province through adult education, and the system has changed. There's a LAMPS, there's a learner management system. In the past, I think that people would send their lists of who attended, and that was all fine. Now people are asked to register for a program, and so the registrations and programs are tied to our funding. If we don't have enough people coming to our classes, they're not going to fund a position to facilitate those courses or to have, year-round office support for Richmond County literacy. So every week is different. Every community learning organization is different. There are over 20 of them in the eastern part of the province, and we are all different. We sometimes have full-time staff. There are places that have 20 staff members. There are people that have part-time staffers. We have a full-time executive director and 4 part-time positions that all those part-time positions need to be filled. And that's a challenge that we have across the province. In the meetings that I sit in on, we have a challenge in recruiting staff because they are part-time positions, and we all have a challenge in recruiting participants. So is that the sign of a good economy? I would say so, but at the same time, back to what are the needs that we need to address? And I think that we need to have probably a facilitator who's not going to be a full-time instructor when they're there. It's bringing in the experts, because we all seem to be running after the same 3 or 4 people across Cape Breton Island who can teach mental health first aid, for example, who can teach WMIS, who can teach food handlers. So we need to become the experts in those fields and become the trainer. So we need to train people who will become trainers, and we need to look at who are our participants, who are our clients, and where are they going. We ran a very successful Skills for Success program where 2/3 of the participants went on to employment. We've run work options programs where people are working, and that's what we want to do. We want to help the marketplace, which is what our funder wants us to do. But at the same time, how do we work with the federal government? A great example would be to work with the federal government on a New Horizons grant where we could teach seniors about what is virtual health. How do you set up a great appointment? You can chat on the phone with your doctor if you want to renew a prescription, but if you're trying to show them that bump on your arm, it's really hard to do that through a regular landline. So we need to create partnerships, I guess, with different levels of government that are going to be able to help a sector that we are not funded to do. And the municipal government, for example, here we have partnered on a project to bring marionettes as part of a family literacy initiative. And oftentimes kids who have literacy issues, writing, telling the story, reading a book, will act out, place, a story. So a marionette for us was a good example of how let's tell a story that people can understand what's going on without saying any words. There are lots of different ways to encourage people to learn. And so when you're a kid, everything is possible. What we're trying to do is say, even if you're a kid of 85, anything is possible. Give us a call, come check us out. And we're open to working with any group to try to increase literacy, but also to create good learning opportunities for everybody.
Now, as Lisa Berthier mentioned to you earlier, this isn't her first time serving in a literacy position like this. So to wrap up our conversation earlier this week in St. Peter's, I asked her if she had a particular Lisa Berthier philosophy towards literacy and her new position in Richmond County, or if she felt that there were broader themes that are simply being put into play locally.
I would love to be able to respond to all the needs that there are. I get people saying, I'd like to take a French class. I'd like to take a cooking class. I'd like to, and they associate literacy with learning something, which I get. I'd love to do health literacy, digital literacy, financial literacy. Numeracy is connected in there. So how do we make learning fun for families, for individuals, for people who don't have a grade 12, for people who have a grade 12, but that was 50 years ago and they want to learn something new? Perhaps somebody had to leave school early and now wants to go to NSCC or St. FX, some other university. How do we get them ready for that? How do we get people their GEDs? Back in the day, literacy was about getting your GED, your grade 12 equivalency. Nowadays, people in our economy, people don't ask for that anymore. It's like, are you able to work? Great. So our challenge right now is not having students because they're out working. That's a good challenge to have, right? But how do we make people who are underemployed, not working at the level that they might want to, how do we help those people? How do we help people who have certain challenges when it comes to numbers? That they're inverted, that they can't do math in their head. Doesn't mean they're not as smart as the next person. It just means that they're challenged in that. I can recite my times table, but I can't change a tire to save my life. So everybody brings different skills. So I think part of what I would like to do is be able to go to every community and bring out what is literacy, what do we do.
And there you have it, friends. That wraps up this week's edition of Telile 24/7. Thank you for tuning in, and a big thank you to my interview guests this week, Brenda Chisholm-Beaton, Stephen Marcellus, and Lisa Berthier. And thanks to my colleagues at Telile Community Television for filming and formatting the Richmond Municipal Council footage that you saw on this week's episode, Becky Bourinot, Nick Boudreau, and Callen Cowan. If you have any thoughts about what you've seen over the past hour, or just some suggestions for future shows, please contact me directly or contact Telile Community Television in Arishat. And be sure to follow Telile on social media. For now, I'm Adam Cook. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of Telile 24/7. I look forward to seeing you next week with a brand new show. Bye for now.